Well, there goes peaceful routine, Fred thought to himself as he watched workers from Imperial Transport Agency laying down the last bit of road. They showed up several months ago, first in the distance as they tore down old road and replaced it with modern highway. He went out and sold them some moonshine, for tired workers were an opportunity no provider of illegal alcohol could pass up, but other than that he really paid them no mind, until about a month ago, when a small group detached from the main construction and started laying down another road, this time to his home in Redville. Damn, gonna have to put Shine Distillery underground again. Fred, honorary mayor and 50% of population of Redville, thought to himself, while his wife ventured to greet the workers who started doing some measurements near their house and invited them for some fresh dinner, and indeed the workers made up for a surprisingly good stew. Of course, when their friends realized that they were not coming back, they came knocking with shovels, pickaxes and some other bizarre tools that locals never saw, but Fred simply waved some papers at them. Papers that identified him as Honorary Discharged Colonel Frederick van der Zex of 6th Imperial Planewalker Division, and the workers turned back. This really was an overreaction on their part. My wife's little antic really shouldn't be considered an issue, especially not after everything that happened 30 years ago. But the workers kept grumbling, so he went out and gave them several dozen bottles of moonshine for free, which, like magic, made them instantly forget about their friends. Over the next few days the work continued, though the crew stayed away from Redville, and a loud clang of heavy machinery ruined perfect silence of the area. Miss van der Zex seemed to like it though, for it reminded her of her underground home, so Fred kept his mouth shut and his concerns locked up deep inside of his brain, for he suspected that this construction crew wasn't just here to connect his mostly abandoned village to the highway, and that his idyllic, peaceful lifestyle, aside from some trips into the ranged forests, was about to change for the worse. A day later, his dark fears were confirmed when a loud noise like a hurricane woke him up. He grabbed his rifle from under the bed, hoping that it was still working after being soaked in alcohol dozens of times, and removed protective braces from his wife's arms, allowing her to do what she did best. Then he loaded up the rifle and waited, only to be taken by surprise when this horrendous noise suddenly stopped and was followed by gentle knocking on the door. He told his wife to stay put and sneak to the hallway when the knocking repeated itself again, and now that he was at the ground level, he could still the weird noise, though now it was limited to just a background hum.
"Hello there,"
said a polite voice from outside.
"We'd like to talk to the mayor of this fine settlement on behalf of Imperial Urbanization Office."
Fred stopped dead in his tracks. First, the fact that Imperial government was here was certainly a bad thing, but whoever called Redville a fine settlement was clearly either completely insane or blind, which, when paired with power of the administration, meant even more troubles. Still, the knocking was repeated again, and so Fred decided that he was not going to just sneak his way out of it by pretending to not be at home, and with a heavy sigh, he opened the door.
"Well, good morning to you, good sir,"
a figure standing directly in front of them started without giving Fred a chance to even take a closer look at it. It was probably a man, but Honorary Mayor of Redville was blinded by bright light coming from outside, and so he could only take a panicked step backwards as several figures marched uninvited into his home.
"We apologize for showing at such early hour, but alas, we must work quickly here,"
the lead guest started, as Fred desperately tried to hide his rifle behind his back.
"Have to say, though, this really is a quaint little place you have here, Mayor. I'm sure it'll be an honor for us to work with such an upstanding and law-abiding citizen."
The last few words were said with a bit of a smug smile, as the leading figure looked at the massive moonshine distillery in the kitchen and waved his face tentacles around, a sign that, for most underworlders, was like a conspiratory wink to humans. Oh great, Fred thought. Bureaucrats. Now that the doors were closed and he could see again, he finally had a chance to take a look at his uninvited guests. Aside from the leading one, there were no other underworlders, but the group certainly looked odd, or, as Fred quickly rephrased in his brain, very cosmopolitan. Several humans, planewalkers, shadowlanders, and even a deadlander or two stood in his rather unsightly hallway, all dressed uniformly in drab, dreary grey suits that made them look boring even before they began speaking. Even insignia of urbanization office were grey and barely visible on their lapels, making Fred think that he was looking at a mostly humanoid-shaped wall. But just as he was taking in this dreary visitation, his sight was suddenly attracted to another figure in the back. He must have stared at it a bit too openly, for the leading bureaucrat followed his gaze and let out a small bubbling chuckle through his tentacles.
Ah, no need to worry, good sir. I can assure you that Mr. Pernicle will not be a problem. He was assigned to this zone as a construction wizard to speed up our work.
Fred nodded, and then, after staring at the metal-clad figure for a second more, he turned to the leading office drone again. That's good to know, but if he's not going to be a problem, then why is he wrapped in so many chains and locks that he can't even open his mouth?
Simple,
the tentacled one responded.
Mr. Pernicle here wasn't always a construction wizard. In fact, he was the top student in Imperial College of Demonology in his year. Truly a talented man, that Mr. Pernicle. Unfortunately, he also suffered from the same thing most old-time demonologists did, and started collaborating with the Deep Ones. As a retired colonel, you surely remember that mess 30 years ago, when an infernal castle appeared in the middle of Capital City and briefly turned everyone into mindless minions of some long-dead blood deity. Mr. Pernicle happened to be responsible for that, and after the mess was cleared up, he was sentenced to do community service, as you can see for yourself.
The figure in the back screeched something in an inhuman voice, which prompted one of the bureaucrats to yank its chains, throwing it to the ground.
Well, he still has some ideas of his own every now and then, but I can assure you he'll be fine,
Tentacled One said encouragingly, clearly seeing something in Fred's eyes.
Regardless, we've come here today to bring you some amazing news. As of today, you are no longer an honorary mayor, but a real one. His Imperial Majesty, in his eternal wisdom, designated this area as new urban zone, and since you are already established man in charge, it was deemed only fair that you will continue to manage the place. All you need to do is sign here.
With that, a tentacle extended, holding a piece of paper and a pen, and Fred picked it up with a soft popping noise as suction caps let them go. He suspected that he should probably read this document through, but it felt that every time he looked at it, the proclamation had more and more pages. He gave up after 3 sentences of bureaucratic gibberish, which he honestly believed were probably not even real words, and just flipped to the last page and raised his pen.
Hold on. I think there's some mix-up here with the name. Are you sure you're in the right place, gentleman? He risked. Of course we are. Imperial government never makes mistakes after all.
The one with tentacles seemed a bit offended by the idea.
This is just to make everything as clear as possible in papers. So, as soon as you sign, Redville will no longer be called like that.
I can see that, Fred muttered. But do we really have to call it like that? Can't we get something with even a tiny bit of imagination?
Of course not, Tentacle officials said. As I said, everything must be clear and concise and adhere to Imperial naming convention. Imagination, he says, can you believe it?
That last bit was addressed to the rest of the bureaucrats, who all uttered a creepy, synchronized and completely humorless chuckle.
Now then, just sign the document, good sir. There you go. Congratulations, as of today, you will be in charge of Imperial Urban Zone F-037, and we will be your city council. Shall we begin our work then, Mayor?
And with that, delegation from the ministry performed one well-studied, courteous nod that you wouldn't even notice if you were not expecting it, and marched out, giving Fred expecting looks. The new mayor could only sigh and follow them, thinking how his retirement was too good to be true. He shouted down into the basement to his wife to stay put and to make herself some homemade breakfast, with special emphasis on homemade, grabbed his black and blue uniform coat he last wore over a decade ago, and walked outside into the sunlight. There, he immediately noticed the source of earlier noise, a massive airship that was now suspended in the air not far away from his house, above the lake. He never understood how those things worked, even though he piloted one while he was still in the army, but apparently the Empire got the blueprints for intervening in a rebellion in one of the Frost Kingdoms on the Ice Plane. He remembered that campaign rather fondly. Frostlanders made extremely good and strong alcohol, which almost helped you forget about starving to death due to overstretched supply lines. He and his sergeant exchanged legs to survive the last week of it, for eating your own appendage seemed kinda wrong, but fortunately they were all issued cybernetic replacements as honorable veterans, so the end result was still positive. Regardless, after a moment of staring at the airship and reminiscing about good old army days, Fred turned his attention to patiently waiting grey bureaucrats, who were all surrounding Mr. Pernicle, who was already waving his arm in the air, creating a net of roads that went out of the central roundabout. Fred noticed that and rushed towards the group.
Hey, stop!
He shouted, waving his arms just like the construction wizard.
Shouldn't we first discuss what we want to do here?
The walk did not stop. Instead, the main tentacled bureaucrat slowly turned to Fred and shook his head.
What is there to discuss, Mayor? Everything regarding creation of new Imperial hives is right here.
He pointed to his head, and his equally monotone colleagues did the same.
And if any one of us forgets anything, it is also here.
He patted something on his back, something that, as Fred thought at first, was a backpack. Instead, it turned out to be a massive book, which he honestly believed to be wrapped in skin of some long-extinct monstrosity, titled Creation of Imperial Cities Step by Step by Andrew Ryan.
Of course, you will still have a say in creation of various services and locations, Mr. Mayor,
the tentacle one said.
But when it comes to basics like designing hive districts, you can leave it to us. It would be highly unsightly for someone of your rank to deal with things like plumbing or electrical lines.
Fred could only nod to that. Indeed, idea of placing every single sewer line on their entire city, even relatively small one, seemed like a boring chore, so he was more than eager to leave it to the drones. Or, well, to be more precise, leave it to Mr. Pernicle, who kept shrieking like a goat tied to an electric chair. Despite that, though, the new official mayor still had questions.
Alright, fine, I won't mess with your jobs, he said, to another collective approving nod. But what about people? Sure, we can build some roads, plan some districts, and maybe ask Mr. Pernicle to build a school or a hospital or two, but we still won't have anyone to actually attend them. Don't cities just grow organically over time, depending on a myriad of variables?
The tentacled bureaucrat turned to Fred once again, raising a rubbery eyebrow.
In primitive societies, maybe, he said, but this place was designated as New Urban Zone by His Imperial Majesty himself. Do you want to say that he made a mistake?
No, Fred shouted even before his subordinate stopped speaking.
Of course not, he never makes any.
Good, said Imperial Executor, and vanished in a cloud of smoke as unexpectedly as he appeared. However, Fred continued, still shivering a little, the question stands. We may get a setup for the city, sure, but we'll still need people to live in it.
Valid point, said Tentacles. And worry not, it is all part of the plan, and the name of said plan is Relocations and Refugees. Actually, we should rename refugees to migrants, but then the name wouldn't be as neat and orderly. Regardless, there are always tens or even hundreds of thousands of people around the world who look for a place to call home. Some of them come from the Empire itself. For example, did you know that Zone B-078 was built on an ancient burial ground?
No. Is that a problem?
Well, normally it wouldn't be, but this particular burial ground was not made for regular people but for the deep ones. And you know how people are around them. Tentacles start sprouting in weird places, weird doomsday cults are being formed, and the very fabric of reality get warped so much that you can turn TV in the morning and watch news reports from 7 alternate universes away. So, Zone B-078 will be demolished, and its citizens will have to find some other place to live, which is where we come in. And of course, we can't forget about denizens of other planes. Especially Deadlanders are always looking for quite literal green pastures due to their lands being, well, dead. And see, some of them are already here.
Indeed, a group of pale steel-clad figures suddenly emerged from underground and scattered looking for a good place to claim.
Wait, what? How are they here already? We just formed this place to die.
We have our ways, said one of the bureaucrats ominously. She wasn't wearing a steel plate, but was still easy to recognize as one of the Deadlanders themselves, for she was covered in luminescent tattoos that looked so elaborate that they seemed to move when you looked at them. And if tattoos were not dead giveaway, then 3 swords she had on her were more than enough of a clue.
Indeed, indeed, said Tentacled One. Deadlander ancient way of nepotism is truly an amazing discovery that we should make use of more often. But back on topic, we also suspect a lot of refugees from the Western Federation to come to us.
Let me guess, Fred sighed. They have another civil war out there, don't they? Which one is it now?
Hard to say, Tentacles responded. I think it's the 4th one they have this year. You know how it is, make a society when even a toddler has an assault rifle, and you're bound to have problems like that. Some of them seem to have enough of the constant gunfire though, and come here.
Obviously. But do we really want them? And will they even survive being separated from their precious guns?
Some of them won't, but we have rehab facilities for that. For most, though, we just offer them Deadlander deal. No firearms, but as many melee weapons as they can carry on themselves. Most of them leave immigration office loaded from head to toe with swords and halberds, but that's beside the point now. As you can see, the question of population is not really a problem. Once we have some basic infrastructure, people will show up, and possibly not just because taxes are lower in new urban zones like ours.
That gave Fred a good explanation for why his friends kept moving from city to city like some kind of modern nomads. He thanked the leading official for explanations, but in that moment he also noticed that he never asked his name, so he quickly backpedaled to rectify his mistake.
Name?
Tentacled One seemed amused by the question.
Names are so untidy in official paperwork. Some are too long, some are too short, some are unpronounceable by creatures from our dimension, and some are just plain silly. As such, our beloved ministry gave us all appropriate code names. For instance, I am Comrade 1. Comrade 1 bowed. This is Comrade 2. He pointed to Deadlander lady who was cleaning her glowing fingernails with a claymore larger than Fred. She gave him a quick nod. This is Comrade 3. A stone construct raised its hand and offered a shaky wave that sounded like rocks sliding down the mountainside. And this is Comrade 5. Wait, what about Comrade 4? Fred asked. We don't talk about Comrade 4, Tentacles responded without missing a beat. So, this is... Yes, I think I get the picture. Fred shook his head with resignation. All for more efficient paperwork, eh? Of course. Bureaucrats nodded in unison. And speaking of that, how about you begin your work as well, Mr. Mayor? We may be able to deal with basic stuff like districts, but we still need your signature on official legislation and city laws. With that, one of the grey drones stepped forward, carrying a pile of papers that made Fred's head spin. These are just basics, so you should be done with them in no time. All they really need is your signature. Tentacles offered guidance, clearly seeing that his mayor was confused beyond words. Okay, sure, Fred psyched himself up for the job. No matter what you do, at least try to do it right, his father used to say. And so new mayor of F-037 grabbed a pen and started sorting through a pile of papers, with Comrade 1 patiently standing by his side, offering guidance. This one is the dimensional plumbing law, to allow installation of sanitary portals in toilets. Sadly, due to a bit of scandal in the Highlands, we can no longer dump our sewers there, but we can still avoid all the mess related to plumbing. Sign here. This one is Singularity Trash Disposal Law, that allows us to create microscopic black holes to avoid creating massive landfill sites, which are an abomination in the eyes of our glorious Emperor. Sign here. And this one is Anti-Necromancy Law, which outlaws graveyards and forces all citizens to end up in crematorium after their demise. We don't really want another undead revolution, don't we? Fred nodded. He remembered his mother talking about it. Entire dead population of the Empire suddenly rose up from their graves, formed a labor union and demanded equal laws and overdue salaries. Took a while to round them up and put them in the ground again, but no one wanted to see them raise and sing their revolutionary songs even once more. And this one is the Supplemental Cloning Law, but I'm sure you know why this one is important. Fred nodded again.
Deadlanders, like Fred's wife, might have been one of the most valued allies and closest friends of the Empire, but they were quirky people who had to eat other people to sustain themselves. Obviously, law-abiding Imperial citizens were out of the question, though not law-abiding ones were a completely different story, and so proper meat had to be procured in some other fashion, which is why cloning became so important. And so, Fred continued to sign this seemingly never-ending pile of documents long into the afternoon hours, and quickly turned off his brain to shut himself off from constant bureaucratic rambling, but then was woken up by the last position on the list.
Very well, sign here and here and here, and that is another legislation passed. And now for the act of soul-rending for unruly students. Please sign here.
Yeah, sure. Wait, hold just one moment. Fred backtracked quickly. What do you mean, soul-rending for students?
Oh, a very simple thing.
The tentacled one waves its appendages dismissively, as if talking about unpleasant weather.
Every school in the city will be connected to the Deadlands, more specifically to the lair of one Terratus the Malicious, Soul Devourer of Worlds. There, students who do not pay attention will go through additional lessons that will ensure their future good behavior.
And do you think that ripping out their souls and feeding them to some eldritch abomination is the way to do it? Fred asked, taken aback by Comrade One's apathy.
Ripping their souls out? Who said anything about that? As I said, the students will be sent there to learn proper discipline, and let me tell you, Mr. Terratus never fails to get the kids in line.
But still, how do we ensure safety of the kids there? You know, safety from being that is literally called Soul Devourer?
Mr. Mayor, I have a feeling that you consider souls to be a lot more valuable than they really are. For example, just take a look at me and my colleagues. We don't have them, and we're doing just fine.
Fred simply looked at the ever-growing pile of papers on his desk and said nothing. There was no reason to argue.
But it's understandable, of course. People with souls often overestimate them. For example, according to Ministry of Internal, your soul only has a ranking of 8 out of 10, Mr. Mayor.
That's not that bad, all things considering, Fred muttered, remembering all the things he did 3 decades ago.
No, Mr. Mayor, this is impurity rating, where the optimal value is 0 out of 10. But of course, only His Imperial Majesty is a picture of purity like that, but still, decent citizens should probably aim to go no higher than 3. But let's not get sidetracked here.
A tentacle pointed to another pile of papers, untouched as of yet.
Long story short, Mr. Terratus is a contracted official of Imperial Ministry of Education and receives his payment in, leftover souls. Alternatively, citizens may extract their soul willingly and offer it to him, which is actually how he gets 80% of his salary.
To that, Fred could only respond slack-jawed, "What? Who in the hell would do something like that willingly?" The tentacled one chuckled.
Why? Because it's profitable, of course. By donating your soul to Ministry of Education, a citizen is exempt from paying taxes for 5 years. That goes up to 10 if you donate it to Ministry of Peace and Safety, but they only accept pure ones.
Fred took these news as any Imperial citizen would. "Where do I sign?" he asked.
I don't have the form with me, but I'll get one from the airship as soon as I'm able,
Comrade One replied, setting his tentacles into a smile. Right, but in that case, if we're not sending the kids there to rip their souls out, then why?
Because, as I said, Mr. Terratus happens to be a perfect disciplinarian. Due to his 9-dimensional nature, he is able to show the students exactly what manner of bad things will happen to them if they'll fall their education, simply by showing them different versions of themselves from alternate realities, Comrade One explained. Seeing yourself dying out of starvation in a cardboard box 5 years from now really does wonders to one's ability to focus in the classroom. And speaking of that, Mr. Terratus' interdimensional knowledge also makes him a perfect physics teacher, and thanks to the fact that he is not bound by that pesky time, he is able to give individual, personalized lectures tailored to every single student in the Empire all at once.
And all it takes are immortal souls of our population, Fred said sarcastically.
A perfect trade then,
Comrade One responded, clearly oblivious to sarcasm.
Besides, if things really grow desperate, then cat people from southern provinces can sell some of their own, since they all have a surplus. But you don't have to worry yourself with that, Mayor. We should move on.
And indeed they should, for F-037 was just starting as a city, and there were still thousands of things to do. To that, Fred could only sigh wearily. It seemed that his plan of just sitting on a pier with a fishing pole and a bottle of moonshine would have to wait a bit.